Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about microservices. Microservice is the most popular architecture of modern application. So it's really important to understand this concept. During my time working at a startup in New Jersey, I have applied this architecture to build a human resource application. In this video, I will explain what microservice is, how is it different from traditional monolithic applications, and how to manage microservice code. This is the only video you need to understand microservices. So without further ado, let's dive in. Before microservices, applications are developed using the monolithic architecture. So every module in the applications are packed in one place. Multiple teams have to collaborate to develop the application. For example, let's say we try to build an e-commerce store, then we have a module to track the shopping cart of a user, a module to track the user payment, and a module to track the customer information, and a module to track the inventory in the store. Each module is developed by a separate team and they all collaborate to scale the application. However, this architecture has many limitations. So, first of all, as the code grows, the application becomes more large and complex. So, it's much harder to manage the application. Secondly, you can only scale the entire application. Let's say you want to scale only the payment module so that your application can handle more transactions at the same time. But in monolithic architecture, you have to upgrade the storage for the entire application. That means it will increase the cost. The release process of monolithic application usually takes longer because we have to test and deploy the entire application. This is inefficient in the case where you want to launch new changes frequently. And finally, modules in a monolithic application are usually tightly coupled. So a bug in any module can take down the entire application. So developers need to be careful when deploying new changes, since it's harder to fix and bug might block other teams from making progress. So, what is the solution for all of this? The answer is the microservice architecture. So, the idea is breaking the application into smaller and independent microservices. So, let's take the application I mentioned previously as an example. We can break it into four smaller microservices. The first one is for managing the shopping cart, the second one is for user payment, the third one is manage inventory store, and the final one is to track the customer information. So when we break the application, we want to follow certain criteria. So first of all, we want to split based on business functionalities. So we want a microservice to be large enough to handle a business task. Secondly, one service is only doing one job. So we want to ensure that each microservice is only responsible for a single task. We don't want it to do multitask. And finally, the microservices need to be self-contained and independent. That means we can deploy new changes and scale the microservice without affecting any other microservices in the system. So, how do microservices communicate? So, there are two ways. So, the first way is using API calls. So, each microservice has its own APIs. That means microservices can talk to each other by sending requests to the respective APIs. So, for example, the shopping cart can communicate directly with the inventory microservice to see if an item is available or not. Or the payment microservice can communicate with the customer microservice to retrieve the information, let's say the phone number or the email from the customer. The second form of communication is via message brokerage. So in this architecture, we have a publisher and consumer. So a publisher is a microservice that sends requests or messages to the brokerage. Usually, messages are organized into a queue, and they call that message queue. And the consumer will subscribe to a queue and consume the messages when they are available. So several popular message brokerage are Kafka and RabbitMQ. So I'm gonna make several tutorials about those technologies in the future. So subscribe so that you don't miss it. Even though microservice solves several problems of monolithic application, it still has several limitations. So first of all, we have to configure communication between services. That means we add more complexity to the system. Secondly, usually in a microservice architecture, we have to deploy multiple instances of the same service because we want backup if one microservice fails. And we want to use load balancer to distribute the traffic evenly across the instances. But that means it's more difficult to monitor multiple instances because they are distributed across the server. And finally, we're going to discuss how companies manage microservice code. The first way is monorepo. That means we're going to use one Git repository that has multiple projects, and each project is responsible for a single microservice. The second way is polyrepo. So we use one Git repository for each microservice. And this is a more popular way that companies often use to develop microservice code. So let's discuss the pros and cons of each approach. So for monorepo, in terms of advantages, it makes code management and development much easier because we have everything in one place. Secondly, changes can be tracked together, tested together, and released together. And that means if we make a change in a microservice and that affects other microservices, we can easily spot it out. And finally, because we have multiple projects in the same repository, we can create shared code and configurations, then reuse that in multiple projects. In terms of drawbacks, less experienced developer might create tight coupling of projects. And that's not good because if one microservice fails, it will affect and block other microservices. Secondly, since we put everything in a single repo, that means we will have very big source code as the application grows, and that means Git interaction will be very slow. And finally, since we put everything in a single place, we need to do extra work to determine which microservice needs to be built and deployed. We don't want to deploy the entire application. So for polyrepo, in terms of advantages, it's very easy to determine change and deploy a microservice because each project has its own CI/CD pipeline. And secondly, since we have multiple repositories for each project, it's impossible to make a mistake of create tight coupling between projects. But in terms of drawbacks, I think searching and debugging is more difficult because we have multiple projects. So if there's a bug in the application, we have to go through all of them. And the process is quite long and tedious. And the same thing applies to cross-cutting changes as well. So if we make a change in a microservice that affects other microservices, we have to go through all other microservices and fix the code to make it compatible with the new changes. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoy it. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. That support the channel a lot. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.